Good evening. Welcome to Red London with Alma Katsu. I'm Amanda Olkey, Director of Adult Education at the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm very pleased to have Alma with us to discuss her latest spy thriller. Alma is the award-winning author of 7 novels, including Red Widow, where she introduced Lyndsey Duncan, the lead in that book and in Red London. Now, Alma knows intel. She knows what she's writing about. She had a 35-year career as a senior intelligence analyst for several U.S. agencies, including the CIA and NSA, where she advised policymakers and military commanders on issues of national security. Alma's going to do a brief overview of Red London. No spoilers, though. No spoilers. Maybe a spoiler. I don't know. We'll decide later. And she'll read a brief passage. Then I will ask her some questions since I've had the pleasure of reading the book already. Also, cheesy moment. We wanted to give this a book clubby vibe. So, Alma, I'm having a little grapefruit juice and bubbles. Will you cheers with me?
Cheers with
cheers.
You. Cheers with everybody.
Cheers. Watching. Glad everyone could be here. We used to do a lot of virtual happy hours, so we wanted to bring a little bit of that feeling back. Just a reminder, if you have questions, please use the Q&A feature to write them in. We'll try to get to as many of them as possible. We are focusing on the spy books tonight, but Alma has written a lot of cool books, and we will be okay with questions that are about some of her other very thrilling works. So without further ado, over to you, Alma.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, everybody who's tuning in tonight. I really appreciate it. I love this book, Red London. As Amanda mentioned, it's the second book in the series, but it's written so that you don't really have to read the first book, Red Widow. It's almost like a standalone. It has the same main character, Lyndsey Duncan, who's a young case officer at CIA. And a couple of the other characters kind of pop their heads up, but you know, all the backstory you need to know is explained in the book. And so don't feel like you have to wait to read it. So let me tell you a little bit about it. It's if you've heard anything about it, you heard that it's really ripped from the headlines. And I think Amanda has a couple questions for me on that too. But the book opens in London in a very ritzy neighborhood known as Billionaires Row. A lot of wealthy foreigners buy property there, investment property. A lot of the houses actually stand empty. But one night there's a home invasion at the mansion that belongs to a Russian oligarch, Mikhail Rotenberg. And we see the home invasion through the eyes of his wife, Emily. And Emily is British. She comes from one of those impoverished British aristocratic families. She she's a little, she's worried because her husband had always been close to Putin and she considered him very safe, that they really had nothing to worry about. But this is set in a slightly future world where Putin has disappeared. One night, he just mysteriously disappeared, and there was a new Russian president, also ex-KGB, by the name of Viktor Kosygin. And Emily wonders if Viktor has something against her husband, if their lives are in danger now. At the same time, Lyndsey is coming over. She's going to be stationed out of London. She has a new asset to run, a very important one. He's in Russian intelligence. And he's also extremely dangerous one. He's a war criminal. So they've sent her to be sort of forward deployed, so it's easier for her to get to run him as an asset. But she gets contacted, and CIA and MI6 have decided that it might be a good time to try to flip Emily against her husband after the home invasion. And, they don't believe Kosygin when he says, Russia wants to be a good international citizen again, and we're going to do all the right things. And so they would like to try to get Rotenberg's billions off the table. Like any good oligarch, he hides his money in offshore accounts. So they need someone to be on the inside. They need someone on the inside with access to that data. And so they want to send Lyndsey in to assess Emily and see if she seems to be at the point where she might flip on her husband. All this is going well. The passage I'm going to read actually comes a little later in the book, so I don't know if this is a spoiler or not, but Lyndsey does manage to meet Emily and befriend her. And she does such a good job that she's invited to join the entourage, basically, to move into the Rotenberg mansion and be part of Emily's little entourage. You know, in the beginning, she doesn't have much sympathy for Emily because she assumes she knows what kind of woman Emily must be, you know, a gold digger to marry a Russian oligarch. But as she gets to know Emily, she sees that it's a little more complicated than that. And it's not going to be as straightforward as she thought it was. And then things get really interesting because one day Lyndsey comes to the mansion intending to go see Emily, and she sees another woman sitting next to Emily, kind of cozying up to her, chatting her up, just like Lyndsey's doing. But Lyndsey knows this woman. They used to work together at CIA. Danny Childs is her name, and she left. She quit CIA and went into private intelligence. And I think we're going to talk about what is private intelligence about later. But what this means is somebody hired Danny to go after the same information that Lyndsey's going after. And Lyndsey has no idea what this is all about. So that's kind of the setup. You can probably tell the story has a little bit of domestic suspense in it because half of the chapters are told from Emily's point of view. And so we get to see what it's like inside the Rotenberg mansion. What is it like to be an oligarch's wife? I'm going to read just a couple pages for you. I was asked to pick some pages that were fitting for this audience, which are people who understand a little bit more about intelligence than the average person. So, like I said, this comes about 130 pages into the book, and Lyndsey's already, Emily's asked her to consider moving in and, being her friend and keeping her company for a while. The next day, after Claiborne's questions about security inside, Lyndsey decides to stop by the Rotenberg mansion unexpectedly. It will be a good test. She's never been by when they haven't been expecting her. She brings a device with her that makes technical measurements from signals it grabs out of the air. It will help her better understand how communications are monitored, what safeguards might be in place. There are other things she can check out too, such as procedures at the gatehouse, how long it takes when you're not expected, who on the security team gets alerted. If she's lucky, she'll have a few minutes alone inside without the usual housekeeper escort. She spent the evening considering Emily's offer. Lyndsey wishes she could say that her decision is based on a thorough review of the pluses and minuses, but that would be a lie. Objectively, there's no contest. She shouldn't do it. Too risky. However, there's not a case officer alive who wouldn't jump at the chance. And the spy business is a profession for risk takers, for show-offs, to be brutally honest, for people with perhaps too much confidence in their own abilities, for people who want to flirt with disaster to confirm just how exceptional they are. She knows this. She's seen this flaw in far too many of her peers, and yet she's eager to let Emily know before she changes her mind. She tells herself that from what she's seen so far, it's not especially dangerous. There are only a handful of guards on duty at any time and a perimeter wall that's scalable in an emergency. She doesn't know Volkov, the head of security, has only nodded at him once or twice, but he seems professional. He doesn't seem like the kind of man who'd shoot at one of his employer's wife's friends in a moment of confusion. She's fairly certain that she could get out of there if she really needed to, if her life depended on it. Sure, there could be something brewing with Kosygin that she's not aware of. He seems to need to get his hands on Rotenberg's money, if the reason is murky. Everyone's antsy about Ukraine. Kosygin could have needs that CIA and MI6 aren't aware of yet. After one failed attempt, who knows what he might try next? Kidnapping a family member, poisoning, another attack on the house. And yet, Lyndsey still wants to do this. Her mind, it would seem, is made up. Before she heads out, she makes an appointment with London Station to visit the station's technical operations lead. He's a former Navy technical specialist, very serious-minded, like a lot of technical staff she's worked with. It's a profession that requires and values expertise and efficiency. There's not a lot of time for fooling around when you're planting bugs in enemy territory. Lyndsey finds him in a storeroom surrounded by racks of equipment and go bags. There's a sagging couch pulled up against one wall. There's a lot of waiting in this profession, and a mini fridge undoubtedly stocked with energy drinks. Tech officers seem to live on them. From what you tell me about this guy, Rotenberg, he means, I'd be surprised if they're not checking every packet that goes over their network. The tech ops officer has neatly kept facial hair, and he runs his fingers over the part circling his mouth as he thinks. If you use a VPN, virtual private network, or something else to protect your communications when you're inside, it might make them suspicious. I mean, your average Joe doesn't do that sort of thing. Considering your cover, it would be better if you used a wiped phone and laptop when you're inside, and keep your secure phone powered down so they don't detect it. Even better, don't bring it in with you, so a nosy housekeeper doesn't come across it hidden in your things. She bristles at the idea of carrying a second phone on her person inside the mansion. It seems like the kind of thing only done by people with secrets, and Lynn Prescott is not the kind of person who would have secrets. She listens as the tech officer shows her how to use the secure cell phone and operate the VPN they've installed on her personal laptop. You can always say it's something your family makes you do to protect yourself, he says of the VPN, shrugging. Rich people are quirky, but it's your choice, she nods mutely. All right, that's it for the excerpt. Amanda, are you there?
But I was muted. I am here. So thank you so much. That was, I love the VPN as I get on mine at home, and I'm like, oh, now I'm going to feel more like I'm a spy when I do.
I'm not saying people shouldn't use VPNs. They're actually a great idea.
They are. Well, I had lots of questions, and thank you for letting us have a few spoilers, because it's hard to talk about a book without revealing something. And we also want to tantalize them as well. I've got a question about, what kind of cell phone is she using? Is she using a...
Gosh, it's so funny. I've been doing events for this, and I met with a book club the other day, and they had all read Red Widow. And they came at me with all these questions that I never considered. These were things that as a writer, you just kind of think of as throwaways. So I'm kind of learning, if you do a series, people are very curious about things. I haven't nailed down in my head which cell phone she would be using, but now this is something I'll have to do a little research on. I don't know if people know, but yes, I did work at NSA for 25 years. And when you work at NSA, you know telecommunications inside and out. So I'll have to research and see what kind of cell phone she would probably be using.
Our friend who asked that question said she's a tech support engineer, of course. So that was driving her question. Well, I'll jump over to mine for a minute, but since we were right on that, I wanted to get on it. And I will also say I did not read Red Widow, and so I wanted to say you can pick it up solo, Red London, and absolutely understanding you. Now I want to go back and read Red Widow, but I was not lost. You give enough background of the things that reappear that matter. So that is really great. Now, I found it very interesting in your acknowledgments that you were sitting with your editor when Russia attacked Ukraine. Without spoiling anything, if it's possible, how did that affect your story?
Yes. When Russia invaded Ukraine, you probably heard the wails of dozens of spy writers at the same time, because just about every spy writer I knew was writing about Russia, and we all had the status quo sort of right in front of us. And so, you could I don't want to say predict, but there were certain things that would be of interest in that situation, right? And so you can kind of slant your story in that direction. And that's what I did. The manuscript had already been turned in. And so she said to me, you really need to change things because it won't be satisfying for readers. And I knew that. So I went in and I changed, I sort of picked something else and I changed things to go in that direction. But as you may remember, the events on the ground moved very quickly at the beginning of the invasion. I had to rewrite it like 2 or 3 times, and it still kept falling behind. And then I said, okay, this is not sustainable. I worked in a lot of war rooms, so I know what it's like to try to keep up with events on the ground. And I said, I can't keep doing this. I can't keep rewriting it until the book is finally published, months and months away. So I said, I've got to jump ahead. What's the one thing that everybody wants? For Putin to go away. So I said, I'm going to give people what they want, but I'm going to make the cure worse than the disease. And so I'm really happy with it because I got to create this new villain that I get to make entirely how I see fit. And so hopefully over the course of the books, Kasija's really going to come into his own. So it really worked well because it actually, the Putin's disappearance comes back in the story later on and we find out more about it. But it's so tantalizing to just think of him disappearing and what could have possibly happened to him.
Did that come to you in a bolt, or were you working that problem hard?
Well, by the time I figured that out, I was pretty tired because I had rewritten it and kind of worked over every possible, contingency. And I was just flummoxed and frustrated. And then boom, it just came to me like a bolt.
That is great. So I was amused. You thanked a historian. Also, I really enjoyed your acknowledgements a lot. You thank a historian for helping you understand British aristocracy. Well, how did you prepare to write about the Russian oligarch community in London?
So some people know I am not a Russian specialist, right? Everybody in intelligence, if you're, you have your area of expertise, and they tend to either be regional or topical, like international organized crime or terrorism, or regional. And I was one that was topical. I worked what's basically phase 4, post-conflict, so humanitarian, genocides, all the fun things. I know. So I'm not a Russian specialist, and I have a lot of friends who are Russian specialists, though, and they are very picky. You got to get things right. So I did a lot of reading. I read several books on the oligarchs and tons of articles. Yeah, that's what I did.
Well, certainly your background prepares you to do research, correct?
Oh, absolutely. I even teach a course now for writers on doing research.
Oh, I love that. Our audience usually is intrigued by the publication review board. We've heard wonderful stories. We've heard horror stories. You thank them for your speed, what's your secret? But did you lose any content? Any mysterious tales of the PRB that you want to share?
They actually have done very well for me. Now, let me explain a few things. You'd mentioned I'd written other books. I have 6 other books, and they have nothing to do with intelligence, right? So none of them had to go through the PRB. But while I was working on some early stuff, I was trying to write a spy novel. So I did have a couple manuscripts go through the PRB, and this was quite a while ago. And then they were very strict and would ask for things to come out that I thought were not called for. And what I found now over time is it's sort of a pendulum that swings back and forth. And a lot of it is politically influenced. You can imagine how sensitive CIA is to make sure they don't get on the wrong side of certain, policymakers or senators or whatever. So at that time, which was during the Iraq War, Cheney and Rumsfeld were making things very difficult for the intelligence community. And so getting anything out was super hard. Now, for Red Widow and Red London, however, it's been incredibly easy. I don't know if that's I haven't had, they didn't ask for one change in either book.
Oh,
And I don't know if it's because I'm hypersensitive to kind of sensing what needs to stay out. I haven't, or maybe I'm just chicken and I need to sort of get a little closer to, to that line. But so far it's worked out really well. I have a short story coming out with Amazon Original Stories, which is another spy story. And that it's actually like a little science fiction-y. And I thought for sure they were going to laugh their brains out, but they got that through in record time too. So no, I am just grateful. They've really done well for me.
oh, that's fabulous. So you give a lot, but obviously it's okay what you said because you made it through the review board, but you give a lot of detail on safe houses and how meetings are arranged, avoiding detection en route to appointments. Is there anything that you got in the book that surprised you?
Not really. I think the running SDRs and that sort of thing, all of the information I had put in the book is stuff that I think is fairly, has been covered in like other books or TV shows. I really did try not to give anything away because the last thing you want to do is to blow, sources and methods. The intelligence community invests a lot of money and energy in those things, and it's not my place to reveal any of them. So I do worry about that. Also, because I worked in technology for so long too, very nervous about giving away too much on the technical end.
And so you, as you said, you were an analyst. You worked in technology. Did you have to brush up on operation activities to write Lyndsey Duncan? Or had you observed enough ops officers in the wild to conjure her up?
I think this is something because I've heard other people say it too. If you're an analyst, you don't know what operations are like. And that's actually not true. So for a couple reasons. I mean, for one, there's more of these, centers that merge the analysts and the clandestine service in the same spot now so that they inform each other. So analysts get more of a view into what it's really like. But a couple other things. One is I was at NSA for a long time and that's pretty operational. So, a lot of times we'll get pulled in as they're planning a technical op or something like that. So we do get some insight into how that works. And then lastly, when I retired, I've ended up working with a lot of case officers, whether it's, I guess I'm not supposed to say this. I am a consultant for a US agency and I worked at RAND and they had hired some case officers too, case officers, once they retire, really like to tell stories. So, I mean,
especially if you add a drink.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I've known enough case officers to know that sometimes they're just stories and sometimes there's a little truth in them.
Yeah. Well, was Lyndsey inspired by any, I mean, I don't know if you could even say if she was or of any people you've known or yourself?
No, not me at all. She's really sort of a composite of a lot of the young women that I got to work with at CIA and NSA, but really CIA. I was just so impressed by the women that I worked with there, especially the young ones. They're so smart, so together. They could be huge successes anywhere. But these women, decided that they're going to dedicate themselves to serving their fellow Americans. And it's not an easy job. That is really the reason why I wrote these books. It all came about because my editor asked me, I know you always wanted to write a spy novel. This was right after I retired. And she said, do you want to give it a try? And the reason I wanted to do it was because I thought that the women today who are in intelligence are not well represented in pop culture, not in movies, not in TV, not in books, right? I wanted to show them for the incredible professionals that they are. And so that's why I wanted to do this series. It's funny, I did spend a year as a recruiter I was the lead
Oh,
analyst for analytic services in the Northeast. And I got to meet so many just amazing, amazing young women who, like from the time they were 3 years old, I remember one of them told me she decided she wanted to work at CIA and she dedicated her life, learned foreign languages, did all this travel, all this stuff. It is mind-blowing, the people who go and work in the intelligence service today. All us old people, we joke, they never would hire us today.
I think everybody feels that in their field eventually. And we have young people that, especially during the height of the pandemic, attending very heavy duty, current affairs talks we would have. And feel like one person in particular we watched, I think she's off to college now. And it's just, knowing as a kid that she wants to spend her hour listening to the latest spy issues with our director, Chris Costa, is pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
So speaking of a kind of hot issue, or it's been hot for a while, you include a private intelligence firm in your story, as you alluded to. And what made you do that?
Because I think it's an interesting phenomena that probably a lot of people outside of the industry are not aware of. So, and I'd be really interested to get your take on this too. I retired in 2017. And when I started interviewing with folks, I noticed this change where, especially, I was a social media researcher for a while, and I worked with researchers who had been hired, at Google and Facebook and Amazon, those kinds of places. And they always held the intelligence community at arm's length. When I was still in the business, it was impossible to talk to them. And I would only learn things through these researchers who would pass along little tidbits. But when I retired and I started looking for another job, all these companies I found out they were hiring people away from the intelligence community. And I think it's something after the Christopher Steele dossier leak, people sort of realized that, you could hire your own spook if you wanted to. Now, and so I did a little research on this too, and I found that, yes, indeed, companies were starting to hire people away from their government jobs. And why this is a bit of an issue is, let me explain one thing. And I think why this is so popular is because we are living in a time of great disinformation and misdirection. And more people, I think, maybe are trying to get away with things if they can. And who better to help you get away with something than a professional spy, especially a case officer. But the thing is, getting someone with that training at the state level, right, is kind of the nuclear option in the intelligence business. There's always been business intelligence, companies like Kroll, that other companies hire to do things almost like what a private investigator would do, background checks, et cetera, et cetera. But the companies that were hiring ex-case officers were doing it because they wanted them to use the training and tradecraft that they'd learned at the agency. The problem is, when you work for the government, you have the authority to do that legally. When you are a private citizen, you do not. And there were actual cases where companies were breaking the law. And I was reading through the court documents, and I saw what this one tech company that you all know and love hired. The CEO decided he needed a spy on his payroll, and he hired this guy who talked him into doing all kinds of illegal things. Another case you may be aware of was Project Raven, where some NSA linguists were hired by what they thought was a company. It turned out it was a cutout for the UAE. And the UAE wanted them to reconstitute a project that they had been working on at NSA for the UAE government. And that caused such a ruckus, they ended up changing some of the regulations about that you had to have a cooling off period. You could not immediately go work for foreign governments anyway. So for me, it's just fascinating because it's quite a change, and it could be a very dangerous change. And I do think people should be aware of this.
Yeah, definitely. We talk about it and I follow it in the news, and I really was intrigued to see that show up, and you deal with that legality, and what you can do when you're authorized to do it is different than what you can do when you are just a private business person. I must make a geeky aside about our collection at the museum, not a private intelligence firm, but the Enigma machine was actually developed originally for business communication. Isn't that funny? Yeah, I always like to tell people that on a tour. You think it was developed by the German military, but it predated it and was for secure business communication. So that interplay between business secrets and private intelligence is really, really fascinating. Okay, now we'll get into some murky stuff. She had fair warning on these questions. You write that the relationship that Lyndsey had with a member of another service, a gentleman, set her career back, but that having a relationship with a colleague or asset wasn't as damaging for men in the field. Now, this is fiction, but I have heard stories of that occurring in real life. And I wondered if you think that's still the case, or you have any opinion, or you plead the fifth?
I mean, I certainly had heard this, right, from women who've been in the situation. So here's something that I have mentioned before. Part of the reason why I wanted to write this is because I do think women still have a harder time with their careers in intelligence. I've worked at several agencies, right? And I've been a fairly senior person at some of them. I've been on a lot of promotion boards and listened to how people evaluate, candidates. And I think there still is this bias against women, that when women do something, it's, women's work. It's not as important. It's not as special. I don't know how many times I heard women being told, who did incredible things, being told, you just have to wait your turn. We'll recognize you someday. You got to wait your turn. But for a guy who does something, it's like, oh, we gotta reward him. I know this might sound bad to some folks, but as I've mentioned this and things, I get a lot of women nodding their heads, right? That's just the sad truth of things. And the other thing I'll say is, almost every senior man from CIA that I've worked with at some point has confessed to me that he broke the rules. And I'm not talking like for national security reasons. Usually it's for ego, right? They did something, they told somebody something they shouldn't have, or they did something that they shouldn't have done, and they get away with it. Not one woman has ever told me anything like that. And I think the reason is because we know if we get caught, we'll be held accountable. We're more likely to be held accountable. And so, yeah, I did want to bring this up in the book.
Yeah. So that was intriguing to see that show up. And it's not heavy-handed, but it's just kind of a fact of life that Lyndsey is very much acknowledging. So sexual relationships between men and women play a part in both of your Lyndsey Duncan novels. And we're used to honey traps and Romeos from spy fiction, but Lyndsey's friendships or faux friendships with women take the forefront. Lyndsey wrestles with her feelings about gathering intel as a fake friend. Do you think this happens in real life?
Well, I'll tell you where this quality came from. I had mentioned that I was a recruiter for a year, and we often went to these events with recruiters from the clandestine service too. So I hung around a lot of case officers, and I got to tell you, most of them, don't get me wrong, I appreciate what they do and why they have the personalities they do have, but a lot of them are cowboys. But I went once with this woman who was a mid-careerist, and she was the most, well, she was a very different case officer, and she was extremely thoughtful and, you know, just didn't have the knee-jerk cowboy response that a lot of case officers will give you, a lot of bravado. And she got very quiet with me. I think we were driving to the airport. And she said something about like, do I look down on her? And I'm like, what?
Oh.
And she said, we think that analysts look down on us because we have to lie for our jobs. That's what we do. You know, they try to manipulate people. Now, that is a generalization. I mean, I have talked to case officers who try to handle their assets as truthfully as they can. But at the end of the day, there's always an element of deception, if not entirely deception. But this shocked me. I had never heard a case officer ever say anything like that to me. And it really stuck with me. Yeah.
Yeah, I have heard, I have a woman I like very much in mind who will tell you that she can get anyone to do anything. So it was very pleased with that ability. And so that is it's very intriguing to hear about someone feeling like that. We had a wonderful series of ads that were really striking. And it's like, I lie for a living was one of the phrases under one of our spy advisory board members. So that is pretty wild. Well, carrying on with that, the friendship thing, I was unclear. I don't want to do any spoilers. Emily, I don't know what I think of Emily, the oligarch's wife. And I wondered, Lyndsey develops a soft spot for her maybe, but how do you feel about Emily, about someone who has married into this kind of very corrupt, married a very corrupt person?
Well, as a writer, I realized that she had to be sympathetic in some way, or readers would just turn off to her. And she carried so much of the book. Going into it, I had a certain impression based on all the reading and that sort of thing that I had done of what kind of woman, would get in that situation. But, so I had to really think, like, what makes her vulnerable? What are her Achilles heels? How would somebody, unless they were just completely, selfish and in it for themselves, how would someone reconcile that in their head? I mean, that is one thing that you get exposed to in intelligence and probably law enforcement. A lot of people fool themselves, right, in order to give themselves permission to do things they know they shouldn't do. And there's a little bit of that in here too.
Yeah, well, one thing that is intriguing is Lyndsey seems to hold herself together very well, but this kind of wilderness of mirrors at times, not knowing whether she can trust people from other agencies or former colleagues. Do you feel that happens much in the real world or in your experience? Or is that just great paranoia for books and movies?
I think if you're thoughtful in your job, you see it. There's, I've talked to a lot of ex-people in the business, and a lot of them aren't that introspective about their careers. They're very proud of their careers. They're proud of what they did, but they may not always think about, but did I do the right thing? So for Red Widow, for instance, it's all about an incredible betrayal that happens to one of their own, that the agency actually lies to this person on something that's very important. And that's indicative of what really happens. I mean, we know we always have to be 100% candid with the agency. If we screw up, if we do something bad, if there's something that could be used to blackmail us, you have to tell them everything, right? but it's not a two-way street. You are told up front, they can't share everything with you. There just may be things that you're not allowed to know, and you just have to accept it. But you can see where if you're in a situation like that, there's the potential for abuse. And some managers do just use it so they don't have to give you an explanation they'd rather not share with you, or just to make their lives easy or something. Anyway, so, you know, there's always that part of it. Yeah, it always makes me a little sad when I talk to some of my former colleagues and they just won't look critically at the job, because it is, you know, it has a lot of power in it and a lot of responsibility. And I think we do owe it to ourselves as well as our fellow Americans to be a little introspective and make sure that we did the right thing.
I have to comment at this time that the sun set across my face earlier in the program, and now I'm seeing the sun. It's very funny. It's very funny. Anyway, we have a comment from Shannon from Colorado saying hi to you. And she wants to know if you have started on the next installment of the Red books, and any news you can share on, you know, TV deals or movie deals.
On the first part of the question, no, I have not. Because my publisher alternates the books. So one year it's the historical with horror element, and then it's the spy novel. So because the spy novel is coming out this year, I'm doing horror next. You know, I have some thoughts, but it'll be interesting to when I actually get to sit down and do it. I am happy to say that I can confirm we just closed a deal for Red London for a TV series. I don't know if I can announce the studio yet because it's not all completely buttoned up, but I just found out today before this event that the lawyers had actually closed the deal. So I'm really happy with that. I mean, I can talk about this a little bit more if you want. Red Widow had been optioned by Fox for a TV show, and we spent 2 years in development. And at the end of the day, we just couldn't deliver the kind of show that Fox wanted. But you know, to be honest, Fox really didn't know what they wanted from the show. They had a big management change in the middle. Some of you guys may remember Disney bought Fox, and it just made things kind of crazy. But then by that time, I had finished Red London, and the agents and everything had read it, and they were like, no, this is gonna sell, so pull the rights back and let's go out. So around Thanksgiving, I talked to over a dozen studios. There was a lot of interest in it, and we actually had several bidders for it. So I'm really happy that worked out, and I hope we get started before the writers' strike. That's probably going to happen in May. It's always something.
It is so you really plunge the reader into worlds that you can envision. And I just want to go to an oligarch's wives play date, brunch. I mean, I just kept thinking like, that sounds really, I don't want to, you know, I just want to see that. I'd love to see that. So I think they're going to have a blast filming that. So I really imagine.
I think there's going to be a lot of the eye candy with Red London, because we do have all the glamour and the glitz, as well as a lot of gritty stuff. Yeah. So.
It's, you know, it's great because there are times I'm in my spy book, and I'm like, now I'm in my like woman trapped in this marriage book, but she's got a lot of money, and how's she going to get out? It's very, very, it's a lot of fun. So I love this question, came in earlier. But since you talked about alternating your different types of books, one guest wants to know, what is easier or relatively easier to write, the horror fiction or the spy novels? And which is scarier?
Oh, yeah. Well, the spy novels are so much easier for me to write because, you know, I am starting to be out a while now. It's been, over 5 years. So I'm going to age off of my knowledge, and then I'll have to actually do research. But they're easy to write because, you know, I lived it for so long. I can think of a scenario and I know exactly what's going to happen, what the next steps are, what the options are, what could go wrong. It's great. Those 3 historical horror novels are all based on real history. And with the exception of The Fervor, because I really knew about the internment camps, I knew them very well. But for the first one is a retelling of the story of the Donner Party. And the second one is a reimagining of the sinking of the Titanic. And both are just incredibly, detail heavy historical pieces. They take a lot of work, especially that Titanic one, because the scale is huge. And as you can probably imagine, Titanic fans are rabid and you can't get anything wrong. So yeah,
extremely knowledgeable. Well, on the hike I went on yesterday, the Donner Party was mentioned, and it was grueling, but it didn't take all winter. What drew you to that?
To the Donner Party? Oh, well, that's an interesting story. And I don't know how much time we have left, but I had
we'll take a little detour into historical horror because I kind of am digging that. And then we'll go back to spy stuff.
Okay, I'd always known about the Donner Party, and I actually used it in a screenplay that I had to write in graduate school and screenwriting class, and it kind of stuck in the back of my mind. But then once I did the research about, really understanding what happened to them along the entire journey, how could you not have a horror story around it? It was like they were cursed. And a lot of that ended up not getting in my book. But the stuff that happens before they get trapped in the mountains with the snow, people were murdered. There were knife fights. I mean, just crazy, crazy, crazy things. So history is endlessly fascinating. Most of us, all we get is what we learned in school or, little sound bites or something. Once you dig in, it's just so many great stories.
Do you know what and you don't have to tell us, but do you know what your next horror book is about?
Yes, I'm working on it now. It's actually not going to be a historical. It's a contemporary.
Contemporary.
So very different from me. Yeah.
Okay, because I'm very, being a history nerd, was intriguing to see your spinning on these true events. So one of our guests, when you mentioned your research class earlier, wondered where you taught that.
I usually teach it to writers groups. I developed, it's an hour-long course, and it's called Research Like a Pro, because not only was I a research analyst for about 20 of my 30 odd years, I was the director of a research lab for NSA, and I was a senior analyst at RAND. So I've had a lot of exposure to different research methods. And, so in that, I try to teach people not what you normally get. I mean, I've been to conferences for historical novelists, and it's always the same thing over and over again. Oh, this is a nice, reference for Tudor England or something. And that's not helpful for the broad, population. I teach you things that, that a professional researcher would use, like how to properly frame your research question, how to evaluate online sources and other references that you're not really sure of the provenance, things like that, and how to take notes more efficiently, and knowledge management tricks and that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm teaching it again for Mystery Writers of America soon, I think. But I'm trying to get away from, I'm sorry?
I was going to say, is that something regular people, if they were interested, can find through Mystery Writers of America?
That might be limited to members.
Members.
Yeah.
Cool. Oh gosh, here's a grenade that someone has thrown into our Q&A box. You worked for the CIA and the NSA. Do you prefer one over the other?
I don't mind answering this. So, because when I left, I actually worked for NSA twice. I worked for them for 21 years or so. And at 9/11, I actually went downtown. I was in a couple policy positions, and I had the opportunity then to jump to CIA. I was very unhappy with the DOD. I was in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. I was very unhappy with the DOD response on the Iraq War, right? So I was like, get me out of here. So I went over to CIA, and it was fascinating. But the reason probably that I prefer CIA to NSA is, I love NSA. Like I said, when I left the first time and I had my exit interviews, I told them, I said, this is like, I'm divorcing my childhood sweetheart, right? I grew up here. I love this place. It does not love me back, right? And they were like, it's not going to be any better at CIA. And I said, yeah, but it's like your second marriage. You go into it with open eyes, right? I went back to NSA, and I'm sorry to say it was even worse than when I was there before. NSA is an incredibly important agency, but it has a problem with its culture. And until they're able to address that, I'm just, I'm disappointed.
Well, we'll go more into the fantasy realm with our final couple of questions. And if you were going to be operational anywhere in the world right now, where would you want to be?
I don't know. I'm pretty chicken. I spent my whole career stateside. My husband is not in the intelligence business. He's a musician, and he did not want to go live overseas because for him, the work was here. So we never lived overseas. I did work closely with a couple liaison services. Like I said, I'm a big fat chicken. So if I had to go overseas, I'd probably go to Europe somewhere. Where I felt a little bit more comfortable. Oh, Italy would be nice, wouldn't it? Italy is gorgeous.
Yes. I mean, sometimes we can just enjoy these questions for fun's sake. And since you're a big chicken who writes horror and spy books, do you ever get scared for your characters? Like, do you ever get Lyndsey into a position where you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know how she's going to get out of this. Oh, I'm going to write her out of this?
Well, that's the funny thing, because I think most people, if they want to write and they have a hard time finishing the book, it's because they are close to their characters and they don't push them far enough into peril. I teach another course, which is on how to up the ante, how to increase the conflict in your story. Because I noticed this, a lot of people who were aspiring writers, they just didn't make their stories tense enough. They didn't up the ante. And so, and I think a big part of it is because a lot of times we end up identifying with our main characters. There are other versions of us, and we don't want to put ourselves in peril. And you're afraid you're going to get them in a situation that you can't write your way out of. But my advice is actually the opposite. And that is, for every act, every scene, you have to ask yourself, what's the worst thing that could happen? And then write it. Now, you may not use it, but you'll probably learn something about the situation or your character. You might get ideas from it. And more often than not, I've ended up using the scene, and it will take a book in a whole other direction or add a dimension that I didn't feel before. So just ask yourself, what's the worst thing that could happen?
I was wondering if you were going to say, I was going to say to you, what is the coolest scene that you've left on the cutting room floor? But it sounds like they usually end up. Yeah, I like that. Okay, this one came from Hannah, who works with me, and she wants to know, what spy gadget do you wish that you had or you could create into reality?
Oh man, I have seen, because I spent the last 10 years or so of my career in technology. I started off as one of the first analysts to look at social media and to figure out whether or not there was intelligence value there. And that was developing a lot of methodologies and working with researchers on the outside. So that is very near and dear to my heart. And I still think the intelligence community is behind the 8 ball as far as what's possible there. But then I went on to work in emerging technologies. So I actually look at future technologies and evaluate the impact that they'll have on the business of intelligence. I have seen so many cool things in my time that and there's many programs in the intelligence community to help us bring the best of technology, of what's coming over the horizon, into the intelligence community. You know, in the old days, the Defense Department, military industrial complex, but the military was responsible for a lot of R&D, and that's not the case anymore. It's almost all in the private sector.
Wow.
And so it's really important that the government has good relationships so that we can bring the best of what's being developed on the outside in for our purposes. But I have to say, if I could have anything right now, I would probably go back to having the suite of amazing tools I had for measuring disinformation on the internet, because I have so many friends who get attacked by, like, you know, troll armies, and they're helpless. They have no idea what's going on. And these tools really help you break down the social network around a conversation and be able to figure out, are these people authentic or inauthentic? And I've gotten people thrown off of Twitter and things like that. But I gave that up 2 years ago. And so I kind of miss it.
Well, I like your policing of, you know, of the disinformation and the troll people. So oh my gosh, Alma, this has been so much fun. Such a pleasure to get to know you. And we're all excited. We've got people in the chat saying they read Red Widow. Now they're going to read Red London. They're going to go out. So really, this was so interesting, and to learn a lot more about your career. And you were really generous with your comments about, you know, what you did. Someone's a little scared. One of our friends is a little bit scared that the PRB is not doing its job now.
No. I think they're inundated, for one thing. There's so much more than there used to be. And the other thing I tell people is, you know, the analyst motto is truth to power. It's our job to tell policymakers, you know, our best guess, what we really think is going on, even though it might run afoul of what their plans are for developing, you know, U.S. policy. So I do tend to tell the truth when I'm asked questions, maybe a little bit more. You know, I could have glossed over or said happy things or whatever, but I, you know, pretty much was telling you what I honestly think here. Thank you so much for having me. This has been so much fun. It's so fun to have an audience of people who know the intelligence business well.
Well, we have really appreciated it. And those who have stuck around know that the next thing that I'm going to do is tell them that our next program is Wednesday, April 5th at noon Eastern time. And we're looking at the dirty tricks department of the OSS from World War II. That is going to be a lot, talking about gadgets and gear and creativity. So that's going to be really neat. Check our online calendar at the Spy Museum website for that program, and programs for people of all ages. And last but not least, if you've enjoyed this program and others that we've offered for free, please consider making a donation to the Spy Museum. And our donors help us have programs like these. They help us take care of our exhibits, our collections, and reach out to the community. So Alma, thank you as well for helping us meet our mission.
Thank you so much. It's a great institution. I'm so happy to be associated with it in any way.